be seeing me this week, especially since the reason why I'm not here is because I'm probably in the hospital right now or back home with my new baby boy, Asher. But I kind of wanted to leave you guys with a really good review, and I found it a little difficult to be able to find you guys some good videos. So what I decided to do was make the videos myself. So here I am. Even though I'm not with you in person, I'm with you in spirit. So you guys in the back, make sure you're paying attention. Everybody else, make sure you're following along and listening, because this information is going to be reviewed for your final. So as we get in preparation for our final, right, you should have received either by email or a handout a final review packet. I recommend that you do that. Remember, I talked to you about all the extra awesome things that you get for that. So remember, you got to turn that in on the day of the final. Now, in this chapter, let's go ahead and jump right into it so we don't waste too much time here. We're going to be reviewing over Protist and Fungi. Now, there's a lot of stuff in here that we talked about, and then we talked about a long time ago. So let's go ahead and get started. So in this video, we're not going to take a deep dive like we did during the lesson when we first talked about this, but I'm basically going to focus on a couple really important stuff. Now, a protist, what is that? Remember, this is the microscopic organisms. It's not really animals, not really plants, not bacteria, fungus. But these are microscopic organisms that make up the microscopic life in the microscopic world. And we talked about this and we saw these through the microscopes in the lab. Hopefully this is ringing a bell. It says there they come in a bunch of different sizes. Every protist is eukaryote and has both membrane-bound nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotic cells means that they have those membranes around them. Okay, they can move, they can obtain their food. Some of them create their own food through photosynthesis and other processes. So it kind of just depends what protist it is, but a lot of them are going to be consumers as well. All right, so we have a bunch of different types of protists. You can see these in your book. Recommend you look through it. The main couple that I want to talk about are going to be ciliates, amoeboid, and plant-like. Those are the three major protists that we looked at through our microscope. We even saw them also alive and moving. I don't know if you remember those when we saw those. So ciliates, the reason a lot of these protists are going to be named is going to be two ways: the way that they get their food and the way that they move. So ciliates are going to have short hair-like structures that surround the outer membrane of the cell, and they're going to use that to move like a rowboat, right? They're going to row through the water. Remember, a lot of protists live in aquatic or water, so because of that, they're I'm going to give you a lot of references back to boats, right? Then you have amoeboid protist. This is the one that moves kind of like random, right? So it'll extend its pseudopod out, and through cytoplasmic streaming, it's going to fill in those pseudopods or those extensions, and that's how it's going to move through. And if it's going to eat, it'll surround its prey and then engulf it into its body, which we saw a video of, and we saw them through our microscope, right? Then you have plant-like protists. These are protists that are plant-like. This is the one that was kind of hard to find. I don't remember, but it was like the green circle. That's all it is. Okay, these tend to be things like algae, and they're plant-like because they undergo photosynthesis. So they're going to be the food for a lot of other protists, right? Okay, so some movement. Kind of ready to give you a little bit of a preview to this. So we'll go quickly. Some of them move with whip-like structures. This is a long-like hair extension that is found on the protist, and it moves like, it's called the whip-like structure, but it doesn't move like a whip. Remember, we talked about how it moves like a propeller spinning around, and typically the flagellum is going to be reserved for fast, rapid movements throughout the water, and the cilia are going to be still pretty quick, but they're not going to be as fast. Also, the cilia are going to be used for, like I said, rowing the organism through the water, but they also help in moving food into the mouth of the organism as well. So the cilia can also kind of work as hands as well. And then I already talked about pseudopods in the amoeboid movement. Okay, so nutrition of protists. All right, I'm going to move this a little bit over, see if we can get a better image here. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So like it says there, some are consumers, meaning that they have to eat. The paramecium has this fancy opening right here called the oral groove, and that's basically a mouth. And the cilia are these tiny hair-like projections out of the outside. Now the cilia are really important because they help push that food into the oral groove, which allows them to be absorbed. Now, when they're absorbed, they form a food vacuole. That means that a membrane, right, a little portion of this opening here, surrounds that, and that's what allows the food to actually enter into the body and eventually break down and eventually be expelled back out of the body. So that's a food vacuole. All right, let's keep going. Let me line this up right here. Perfect. Let's do it. All right. Amoebas, we talked about this. We saw a video of this when we first went over. They surround their food and then they just engulf it. Some protists perform photosynthesis, making them producers. We know about photosynthesis in detail. Now, reproduction of protists, most of them are going to reproduce asexually by means of mitosis. This means that they're going to duplicate everything inside of them and then they're just going to pinch and separate into two. When that happens, remember, asexual reproduction and mitosis leads to genetically identical offspring. So this is good because it's quick and you don't have to find a suitable mate, but there's no genetic diversity, which is really bad, right? It's quick, but no genetic diversity. A lot of them can produce sexually, and the name for that is called conjugation, and that's really the only thing that you need to remember. Conjugation is the process of where they exchange their genetic information, and then they develop offspring that are a mixture of the genetic information from both parents. So protists in the environment, they're a big part, especially in the ocean. So in the ocean, there's very little sunlight that can get through, and because of that, you have all of these protists, more specifically plankton and algae, that are free flowing in the water column. And those are going to be responsible for creating the base of the food chain. And being the base of the food chain, they're going to be the producers. They're going to create all of the energy in the ocean. Right? And they're really, really tiny. So then the way that it works is that something's going to eat that, those protists, and then something bigger is going to eat what ate the protists, and this process continues, right? So they're like the plants of the ocean, right? You have algae and seaweed and all these things as well, but the protists are going to be the plants or the producers of the ocean. Also, they're going to be the major source of oxygen that we have in the earth. They create a large percentage, something about 70%, somewhere around there, of the oxygen is going to be produced by the protists in the ocean. And it makes sense because there's so much more ocean compared to land, right? All right. Protists can cause serious disease. One of the most deadliest diseases in the world is malaria. That's actually caused by a protist. So yeah, they also can cause things like algae blooms, which can lead to the death of a lot of different types of fish and other animals. But algae blooms are not really the fault of the protozoans or protists. It's just because there's a runoff of fertilizer and stuff like that into the ocean. So when that happens, these protists reproduce really, really fast. So that's why it's really important to keep our oceans clean. But yeah, that would be another damaging thing that we see. Protists can live on their own. That means that they are capable of surviving and doing all their necessary tasks with one cell. But a lot of protists are actually known for forming colonies. So that means that they can live on their own, but they tend to work together. So they form colonies like an ant colony, and they form colonies and work together and exchange and help each other out. Sometimes they even become so dependent on each other that they each do like specific tasks to help them stay alive. But if they were separated, they could live on their own. All right, let's keep going. All right, then we get to talk about fungi. So fungi, a lot of times are confused for plants, but fungi are not plants at all. And the reason for this is because fungi actually cannot create their own energy. All right, so this is the major difference, and we'll talk about that here again in a second. Another major difference is that fungi are actually not going to reproduce through seeds. They're actually going to produce spores, and those spores are what are basically the seeds of the fungi or the mushroom. Okay, all fungi produce spores. Spores are produced in several different ways. Here are some examples of the different ways that those spores are made. You can look those up in your book. Not a huge thing for your test, these different types. The only thing that I will mention is the difference between imperfect fungi and perfect fungi. Imperfect fungi cannot reproduce sexually. They only reproduce asexually. Perfect fungi can reproduce in both ways. Okay, so they can reproduce sexually and asexually. Fungus are any member of kingdom fungi. So these are the major characteristics. Okay, so the first major distinguishing factor between fungi and plants is that the cell walls of fungi are made of chitin, whereas the cell walls of plants are made out of, anybody know? Cellulose. You were right. They're made out of cellulose. This is a major difference. This is why they're different from plants, but another reason what makes them different from animals is that animals don't have cell walls, but fungus do. So they're kind of like an in-between plants and animals. Another thing is that fungi, this is the second major difference, so don't forget it, is that fungi cannot make their own food. They are consumers. Most specifically, they are decomposers. They're going to take and help decay organic material. So when leaves and animals that have died are on the floor, mushrooms will grow into them and help break that down. And they break that down by releasing enzymes into whatever it is that it's attached to, and it breaks down, sucks it in, and uses it as its food. Right? So they do not undergo photosynthesis, even though they look like plants. They feel like plants and all that stuff. They are not plants. They cannot do photosynthesis. Right? Then the inner part of the cell, so hypha or hyphea, is their filaments composed of long cells bound together that make up fungi. So all of the cells inside of the fungi come together and they intertwine. You see this in your book in chapter 7. And those cells all intertwine working together are called hypha. And we talked about how the difference between hypha and mycelia, if you remember correctly, hypha is the part of the mushroom that's found on top or out of the soil. And then inside of the soil, we find the mycelia, and that's the root-like structures. We also talked about the difference between the fruiting body and the rest of the mushroom. We'll talk about that here in a second. So most fungal cells are long cells bound together. They may be grouped to form larger structures. All right, and this is where we start talking about the fruiting body. When you look at a mushroom, the part that you typically think of, the part that sticks out of the soil, the little stalk or the stem that goes from the ground up to that cap that we think of, right? So the little part, right? That's going to be the stipe. It's basically the stem. Then you have the fruiting body. This is the part of fungus that is found outside of the ground. Right? And that's my favorite definition. And this, it's the part, it does produce the spores, but the specific part of the fruiting body that produces spores is called the gills. But the fruiting body is going to be a product of reproduction. They're going to come out, and that's where they're going to produce the spores. So think of the fruiting body of the mushroom, the part that sticks out, right? That's like the apple of an apple tree. They are very similar, right? They're not the actual tree. Like I could still remove the apple and I'll still have an apple tree. The same thing is true about the mushroom. I could remove the fruiting body and there'll still be a mushroom. But you say, Mr. Rodriguez, I can't see it. Remember, a majority of the mushroom is found underneath the soil. Okay, underneath the soil in the mycelia. The fruiting body is just a byproduct of sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction occurs, fruiting body comes out, produces spores. Spores land on the soil and then develop more mycelia and eventually more mushrooms. All right. The gill is found on the underside of the fruiting body, typically underneath the cap, and that's where the spores are produced and held and released from. The cap is the umbrella-shaped structure. You see an image of that. Fungi nutrition. Fungi must obtain energy from material around them. They are decomposers. They break stuff down. The way they do that is by the secretion of digestive enzyme. Saprophyte, an organism that obtains food from dead organic material. That's what a mushroom is. Some of them can be parasitic, meaning that they can attach themselves to humans or animals or other types of plants and steal energy from them, which is really, really not pleasant. For example, if any of you have had athlete's foot, you know what that is. Some of them can form a symbiotic relationship, meaning that both the fungus and the animal or plant are benefited from it. And we see this mostly between fungus and plants and fungus and algae. And they'll form a symbiotic relationship between them. So like it says there, some fungi live in association within the roots of the plants. And they'll do this, the reason why it's symbiotic is one, they help extend or basically enlarge the surface area of the roots that help the roots get water and nutrients more effectively. But also, the roots allow for a nice support structure for the fungus, so they kind of help each other out. The same thing is true with algae, except it's the opposite. Right? The fungus produces structure for the algae, and the algae helps with the production of food for the mushroom. Okay? We already talked about perfect and imperfect. Right? Why are fungi so important? It's because they are decomposer. They are the main parts of decomposition. Them, bacteria, protists, these organisms are going to be mainly responsible for decomposition. This is really important because it continues the energy cycle. Without them, we'd have a bunch of leaves on the ground and a bunch of dead animals and all that stuff on the ground. So fungi are really important because they break down organic material and continue that process of the food cycle indefinitely. And this is the way that God's provision here on earth continues, right? God has designed his creation to have a continual replenishing of energy. And one of the ways that God has designed that is by these really important organisms called decomposers. Some people eat them. Some can be used for medicine. For example, one of the major discoveries in the last few hundred years in regards to medicine is penicillin. One of the best discoveries that helps us fight bacterial infection. Bad fungi, they can cause disease, be venomous, and even kill you if you eat them. And that's it. That's the end of chapter 7. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I know we went through it rather quickly. This is because we've already talked about this stuff in detail, so I just want to hit some of the important stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be making a couple more for you for this week. And make sure you're studying, doing your classwork, and make sure you're behaving. I don't want to hear nothing that you guys aren't behaving or that you guys are giving the sub a hard time. All right, I don't want to have to come back from the hospital or from home for my baby boy Asher, because you guys aren't behaving the way you're supposed to. So I only want to hear good things. All right, guys, have a great day, and I think you'll see me again tomorrow. All right, bye.